Hi everyone, it's Debbie with Book and BuJo, where I talk about all things books, bullet journals, and stationery. Today I am doing a wrap-up of all of the readathons that I have done in May and June. Let's start with year-long readathons. Buzzwordathon for May. The title prompt was 2 or 2, and for that I read Too Far to Fall, the first book in the Edie Doyle Mysteries series, and that is by Shane Sawyer, and I loved this one. It was so good, just super cute, a lot of fun, very enjoyable time trying to figure out and solve the mystery. For the cover prompt, there needed to be eyes on the cover, and for that I read None of the Ninth by Tamsin Muir, the third book in the Locked Tomb series, and loved it. Loved it, loved it. For June, the title prompt was memory words, so read a book that has some type of word that you associate with memory. And for that, I read The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams, and this is the first book in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series. And loved that one as well. Very reminiscent of The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings style of writing, so if you like the way that one's kind of told and the adventure aspect of it, seeing characters kind of grow throughout the book. It's a little bit slower paced, kind of, I would say kind of a mix between like Lord of the Rings series and the Realm of the Elderling series, so more character driven and a lot of kind of adventuring and walking and things like journeying. That's the word I'm looking for. So if you like those type of books, then you may like The Dragonbone Chair. And then for the cover prompt, it's celestial covers. So that has covers that have like the stars, the cosmos, the sky, something you would think, moons, things like that. And for that, I read Insanity, the first book in the Insanity series by Cameron Chase. And it's kind of hard to tell, especially with the black and white version, but all back in here is all kind of like the cosmos looking type galaxies and those purples and teals and some stars and things like that. And I also really like that one of those kind of weird out there books. And it is an Alice in Wonderland retelling. Her name is Alice Wonder. Next up we have Year in Aeldia, and again I have two characters that are participating in Year in Aeldia. For Ariel, she went from 4B to 5B. She entered a cave and has to read a dystopian. And for that, I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the prequel novel to The Hunger Games. And 5 stars. Loved it. Hamish. And then Krasu moved from 4C to 5C, and his prompt was sleep. You need to have the word sleep in the title. And for that, he read Sleeping Giants by Sylvia Neuville. And I also really enjoyed that one. It's told in epistolatory format, so it's kind of like journal entries and things like that. Very good book. And then Year in Aeldia for June, Ariel then moved to 6E, where she had to fight water demons and had to have water on the cover. And she read The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. And I did enjoy that one. And then Karasu moved to 6C, and he met an odd little impling. And so he needed to read a weird, odd, or unusual book. And for that, he read Insanity by Cameron Chase, the first book in the Insanity series. Next up, we have TBR Knockout by Completely Melanie. And for May, the two prompts are flowers and yellow. And for the yellow, I did read Table for Five by Izzy Bromley. Loved it. A great found family trope in that one. Great book. And then for flowers, I read The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. For June, LGBTQIA+. And for that, I read The Savior's Champion by Jenna Morisi, the first book in the Savior's Chef's Kiss. Love that book. Great story, great characters. The action is really good, great from start to finish. And then the other prompt was to read about a trans or non-binary character. And for that, I read A Prayer for the Crown Shy, the second book in the Monk and Robot series by Becky Chambers. Gooberathon. For May, flower was Lily of the Valley, and the prompt is to read a book that has less than 1,000 ratings on Goodreads. And for that, I read A Wonderful Christmas Crime by Jacqueline Frost, the 6th book in the Christmas Tree Farm Mysteries. And I love that series. It's one of my favorite series. It is so much fun. Completely cheesy at times, but laugh out loud funny, and yeah, so fun. Definitely my favorite mystery series. And the other one was Hawthorne, and that is Hope. Read a 5-star prediction. And for that, I read A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, the 14th book in the Wheel of Time series, and also the final book in the series. And I thought it wrapped up really well, and I just enjoyed the series overall as a whole. But also glad that we're done now and can move on to something else. For June, Rose is the flower and Beauty was the prompt. A book picked for the cover, and that was definitely The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams, first book in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series. And then the second flower was Honeysuckle, Devotion. Read the last book in a series, and for that I read Wrath by John Gwynne, the 4th and final book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. Again, love that series. So good. The whole thing is just amazing. Now I do have to say the first book couldn't tell you anything about it. Completely gone. But I think it's mainly kind of giving you the world, telling you about the characters, and getting you set up for the second book, because I was able to go over into the second book and I'm like, I don't remember anything about the first book, but as I'm going through the second book, I had no problem. I knew where I was, knew what was going on and everything. So I think it really sets you up well as you go into the next books. For Sufferathon for May, running through a field, and the prompt is a little treat you got yourself, or 5-star prediction. And for that I read A Wonderful Christmas Crime, which I did get from NetGalley by Jacqueline Frost, and it's the 6th book in the Christmas Tree Farms Mysteries. And yeah, again, love it. And then for June, do something to take care of yourself. And so I did a little self-care of just taking some extra creative time in the month and did some more work on my diamond painting, and I did finish that. I will have pictures of all of the finished ones once I get them framed and up on my wall. I'll make sure I do a little tour for you. Now we move into the actual readathons. First off, for May, I took part in Gooberathon with Jess from Jashi Curran and the BuJo Buddies Book Club. And this one's super fun. So you had a part A and a part B. So part A, you kind of picked a little category, and there's 3 prompts for each, and you have to do the first prompt first, and then you can do the second prompt and then the third prompt. Unless you had a certain perk from last year's Gooberathon, and then you could do them in any order, but only one time. So there's a bunch of different categories. You could do just one, you could do them all. Didn't matter, up to you. I, of course, you know me, I did them all. Yeah. The first one was native plants. And the first prompt was Local Flora, a book you own. And I read Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Ultimate Guide. And this was really fun. So it has this magnetic enclosure. It has like the collectible cards, which is super cute. I think this was my nephew's and he ended up getting rid of it. And I'm like, yes, please. And it's super cute. It's a bunch of pictures and yeah, it was a lot of fun. I really had a great time reading through this one. With that read, I could then move on to the second section, which was ecological restoration. And the points stack on this. So the first prompt is worth 1 point, the second is worth 2, the third one is worth 3 for a 6-point total in that category, which native plants is the category. So the second one is ecological restoration, continue a series. And for that I read Something is Killing the Children, Volume 3 by James Tinian IV. And then we move into endemic biomes, author bored or residing in your country. And for that I read Castle of Dusk and Shadows by Rachel L. Shade, and that is the first book in the Phase of Brightwild series. Next up we have edible plants. Prompt number 1, home growing, a recent addition to your TBR for 1 point. And for that I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, the prequel novel to The Hunger Games. Prompt 2, Foraging and Wild Foods, a second-hand or a borrowed book. And for this I read Baron and Luthien by J.R.R. Tolkien. And this is the second book in the Middle-earth universe. Number 3, Agricultural Systems, a book with over 100,000 ratings. And for that, I read A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, the 14th and final book in the Wheel of Time series. Next category, Medicinal Plants. Herbal Remedies Could Cure a Reading Slump. And for that, I read A Wonderful Christmas Crime by Jacqueline Frost, the 6th book in the Christmas Tree Farm Mysteries. Second prompt in Medicinal Plants, Traditional Medicine, a retelling, folklore, or traditional stories. And for that, I read The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. The third prompt is Pharmabotanicals, a book set in or focusing on the future. And for that, I read Known of the Night by Tam Samir, the 3rd book in the Locked Tomb series. And then we have A Poisonous Plants, the first prompt, Early Identification, an eye-catching cover. And for that, I read Table for Five by Izzy Bromley, and this is very eye-catching and bright yellow. Can't miss it. The second one is Antidote Administration, a recommendation from someone else. And I actually had a couple of them for this that I was recommended, but I did go with Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. The third one for 3 points is Toxic Tactics, a book you are avoiding. And for that, I read Stories from the Book of Hours by Rainer Maria Wilke. And I was supposed to read the Book of Hours, but I couldn't find it. I couldn't get it anywhere. But I was able to get from my library other stories and poems from the Book of Hours. And I was able to find snippets of an audiobook that had a couple of other stories from the Book of Hours. So I read as much as I could get my hands on without having to purchase anything. And it was okay. It was good, but it's, again, poetry, not quite my cup of tea. I can appreciate it, but it's not my go-to. Carnivorous plants. Prompt 1, predatory plants. Poach a book from someone else's reading list. And for that, I read Black Leviathan by Bernard Purpleys, and this was for the Dragon and Draconathon book club, and it was really good. I enjoyed that one, and it was a retelling of Moby Dick. Both dragons. Prompt 2, Traps and Lures, a first in a series. And for that, I read Too Far to Fall by Shane Sawyer, the first book in the E.D. Doyle Mysteries. Prompt number 3 is Digestive Processes, finished in a day. And for that, I read Toilet Bound Hanako-kun, the number 0, I think it said in the series. But it was the first book. And that was kind of fun. Interesting. A little different. And then lastly, for part A, we have Aquatic Plants. Micro Aquariums, has 300 pages or less. And for that, I read Nightmare Abbey by Thomas Love Peacock. Prompt 2, Wetland Ecosystems, a genre blend book. And for that, I read Apprentice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer, the second book in the Assistant to the Villain series. And then lastly, we have Marine Botany, a book set in or around water, and I read Blackbeard Buccaneer by Ralph Delahaye Payne. And I think I like the original Blackbeard first. This is supposed to be kind of a sequel or a companion short story novella to go with it. It was good, but not as good as the original. And then we move into part B, and that is Advanced Plant Studies. So in part B, you can read in any order. And the first one is Biodiversity Basics. Genetic Diversity. Read a book from one host TBR. So actually each of these, there's 3 prompts, and each of them are to read from one of the hosts because there's 3 hosts, one of their TBRs. So one of the books that they were really hoping to get to, or they've given 5 stars to, or whatever it is, they had a list. And for this one, I did choose Jess's pick first. And that was 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Buckman, and I did really enjoy that one. And then I went with Rachel's choice of Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce, and it's the first book in the series. Loved it, loved it. It was so much fun. And if you are someone who is in drama or music in school or any of that kind of stuff, you will find it fascinating. It was so good. Or if you were into Dungeons and Dragons during school as well, just seeing those 2 worlds kind of collide was so much fun. Yeah, loved it. And then Monica's Choice, which I actually also loved. I loved all 3 of the books that they recommended. And I read Blood and Steel by Helen Scherer. And that is the first book in the Legends of Thesmar series. And I am looking forward to continuing with that series as well. And then we move into Plant Practicum. So these three are non-reading prompts. So you have kitchen garden, make a plant-based meal, touch grass, walk in nature, and urban greenification, grow a plant. So I was growing a sweet potato slip. So you know, when like the potatoes get eyes, sweet potatoes get like tiny little plants that start growing off of them, and you can put that in water and they'll grow roots, and then you can grow a sweet potato. And my little slip was actually growing a tiny little sweet potato on it. It was adorable. I hadn't even planted it yet. It was very cute. And I typically have quite a few plant-based meals. So I had yogurt and granola with some berries on top, but my yogurt is dairy-free. It is a plant-based yogurt. So that was my plant-based meal. And I did not get out and do a walk at all. It was already getting a little too warm here in Arizona for that. Plus, I'm an indoor girly. Unless I'm gonna go out in the forest and do some big long hike. So I said, yeah, that's the only prompt I didn't do. And then advanced horticulture, community gardens, a poll-picked book. And I had Saga Volume 9, Something is Killing the Children Volume 3, and Manga Stories by Murakami. And Saga Volume 9 was chosen by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, and I did read that one. And then Exotic Plants, a special edition book. And I was planning on reading Sky of Fire, but I did not get to it. But you'll see in just a minute what happened with that one. And then Propagation Station, a reread. And I did end up rereading Wuthering Heights, the graphic novel, or comic, whatever this one is called, but retold by Jim Pipe of Emily Bronte's original story. So I did read that one. And then you had some perks. Depending on how many points you had from May of 2024's Readathon, which I completed everything, so I have all the points for that one. So I ended up becoming an Uber Goober status. So I had Uber Goober status, and that means that I was able to have a backdate bonus. I could read 99% of it in April and read the last 1% in May, which I did with Castle of Dusk and Shadows. It wasn't quite 99%, but I was at least half the way through the book before I went into May. And then also a prompt swap, which means I could read the books in any order. I didn't have to do prompt 1, then 2, then 3. I could do prompt 2, then 1, then 3. I could do 3, then 2, then 1, however it was I wanted. So I did do that. And for that, I ended up reading number 3 first, which was Castle of Dusk and Shadows. And then double dip. In each of these, you could only use one time. But double dip can use one book for 2 prompts. And I thought I did that, but I don't see anything written down. I'm not sure what I used for that. I didn't write anything down. I marked it as using it, but I didn't. So I didn't end up using that prompt. And none of the books I did read were special editions, so I couldn't use that for anything. But that's all right. So I didn't use that one. But Phantom Book. Yes, can check off the prompt without reading the book. And so that's where that special edition one came in. I was able to check it off without actually reading anything. I ended up with 60 points total, which gave me the Haunting Herbalist title, which is very fun. I love it. So we have from 1 to 12 points is the Spooky Spore, 13 to 24 was Botanical Bud, and then 25 to 36 points was Ghostly Gardener, 37 to 48 was Spiritual Sproutologist, and 49 to 72 was Haunting Herbalist, and actually I got 66 points. So definitely a Haunting Herbalist. Love it. And then we move into May the Force Read With You, and this was with Eric from Break Even Books. And this year I was Horbachu, and Horbachu is a Wookiee, and in order to be a Wookiee, you had to read a retelling or a mythology book, or you could read a book that rhymes with wood. And for this one, I read a retelling, and that was The Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. My moniker is Divine Noble, and my title is Divine. And the calling was light neutral, and I'm part of the Ambassadors Guild. First time I've been on the light side. And then my position is Guild Voice. And I forgot to write down my rank. I needed to tally up those points and figure that out. I think I had around 38 points. It was just shy of 40 points for my rank points. And then for enlightenments, I did need to read from the light side. I have Force Valor, and that was to read a book with the author's name above the title. And for that, I read None of the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. And then Jedi Mind Trick has a closed compound word in the title. Nightmare Abbey by Thomas Love Peacock. Plant Search, flower or plant name in the title. This one took me a little while, but I did figure out House of Bane and Blood, because Bane is. And that was by Alexis L. Menard, and that's first book in the Order of Chaos series. And then Sever Force, initial in the author's name, and I read A Twist of the Blade by S.M. Gaither, the second book in the Shadows and Crowns series. And then lastly was Transfer Force, pastel colors on the cover, and I read Saga Volume 9 by Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples. So these are part of the abilities. So that was the enlightenments, and this is the powers for neutral. And I did Battle Meditation, features games and trials, Dungeons and Drama by Christy Boyce. Doppelganger, word in the title is also on the cover. Blood and Steel by Helen Schurer. Force Barrier, spent money on it. And I did read from one of my auto-buy authors, and that was Of Empires and Dust by Ryan Cahill, the fourth book in the Bound and the Broken series. Loved this book. 5, 6, 7 stars. So good. Read the whole series. It is amazing. Definitely worth your time. Force Empathy. Description mentions a family member, and I read A Wonderful Christmas Crime, and it mentions her husband, and that is by Jacqueline Frost, the sixth book in the Christmas Tree Farm mysteries. Force Healing. A book your younger self would like. And for that I read Too Far to Fall by Shane Sawyer, the first book in the E.D. Doyle mysteries. Precognition. Toss a coin and pick one for heads or tails. And, well, I lost. And if you won, I think you got to read whatever you wanted, or a short book. And if you lost, you had to read a book over 500 pages. Well, I lost. So I read A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson, the last book in the Wheel of Time series. Telekinesis, based on a birth month. So if you are born anywhere from September to December, which I am, you had to read a book that was set after the year 2045. And for that I read, it didn't say specifically, but pretty sure. And I read Exit Strategy by Martha Wells, the fourth book in the Murderbot Diaries. Next we have Partners, the allies on the light side. And the first one is Rebel Alliance. Read a book from a completed series, and it's completed in that the author passed away and will no longer be writing anything else, although his son keeps finding some more stuff and putting it out. But it's basically a completed series, and that's Baron and Luthien by J.R.R. Tolkien, the second book in the Middle-earth universe. And then Resistance, book about revenge, and most definitely Black Leviathan by Bernd Perples, and this is a Moby Dick retelling. Assistance, neutral prompts. Droids, features a species other than humans, and for this I read Drowned Country by Emily Tesh, the second book in the Green Hollows duology. Smugglers, main character has a different sex or orientation than you, and for that I read Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel, the first book in the Themis Files series, and I am very much looking forward to going into the rest of that series. Companions, The Bantha, something massive on the cover, and for that I read Silver in the Wood, also by Emily Tesh, the first book in the Green Hollow duologies. Lothcat, strong religious or spiritual aspect, and for that I read Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the ultimate guide, because this is all about the Greek gods and goddesses. Porg, description mentions the sea and or ocean, and for that I read Blackbeard Buccaneer by Ralph Delahaye Payne. Vulptex, must contain a moniker word, so like a status or a title, and for this one I read Justice Calling by Annie Belay, and Justice was his title, so he was kind of like a judge. As a light neutral ambassador, I do not get any weapons, so no weapons for me, but little do they know, my Wookiee hands can be a weapon, but only in self-defense, if needed. Next we move into starships. Star Destroyer, Sunrise or Sunset on the cover. I actually had a couple of these, but I went with Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. And then we have The Millennium Falcon, and that is a book that came out between 1981 and 1996, and for this I read Bloodchild by Octavia Butler. TIE Fighter. Title starts with a T, an I, or an E, and for that I read Table for Five by Izzy Bromley. X-Wing. Title has 10 or 14 letters. I had a lot of 13 and 12 letter books, but I did find one, and that is The Book of Hours, and that is by Rainer Maria Wilkie. Equipment, datapad. Description has a number in it, and for that I read 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. Holographic disguiser. Face or headwear on the cover, and for this I read Toilet-Bound Hanako-kun by Ida Iro, and this was volume 0. Jetpack. The main character is going somewhere new, and for this I read Apprentice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Mayer, the second book in the series. And then Sensor Jammer, less than 3,000 ratings. Manga Stories #1 by Haruki Murakami. So that was May the Force Read With You, and that was the last of my May readathons. Then we move into June. And of course, I've got my handy dandy reading journal to get me through Camp SeasonAthon, and I was part of the turquoise cabin, and we did come in 3rd, but we did really good. Every cabin had over 300 points, so that was amazing. Over 350 points. Everyone did so good. Pink cabin won, go pink cabin, and then of course purple cabin came in 2nd. And Camp SeasonAthon is put together by Completely Melanie. And let's go through the turquoise cabin prompts, because all the prompts were different, so not every cabin had each of the prompts. So for turquoise, we had the outhouses. Read your lowest rated book. And I actually read 2 for this one. You can do the prompts multiple times, but you can't double up on any books. So 1 prompt per book and no repeating books. So lowest rated, The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, and that was a 3.33, and I gave it a 3. The other one that was my lowest rated on Goodreads, I actually loved it. I gave it 4 stars. It was so good. And I think part of it was just it felt like going home. You know, it's just something familiar and comforting, and it is a fantasy book. So yeah, it kind of followed the basic premise of most fantasy books, and it just felt comfortable reading it, like getting into your comfy jeans, sitting, sipping some hot chocolate on the couch kind of thing feel. And that was A Shadow and Soul by A.R. Colbert, and I will definitely be continuing with the series. So she does have a YouTube channel, the author does. She has all 3 books in the series as audiobooks on her channel for free for anyone to listen to. So I will leave the first book linked down below for you if you're interested. But I really enjoyed it. And then you get points for joining sprints, so your cabin sprints. But since I led, I was able to hop on to Melanie and Kimberly's sprints and count those for points for my cabin. And then we have the dining hall, food on the cover. And for this one, I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, the first book in the series. And there are mushrooms down here on the cover. For the main office, read a book with Found Family, and for that I read A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. Now I did like this one much better than the first book. I gave the first book, was pretty much 3.5 stars. I think originally I put 4 stars, but with some time to think back, it was kind of a 3.5 star for me, but I did give A Court of Mist and Fury 4 stars, the second book in the ACOTAR series. And then we have Assembly Hall, read the group book, which 4.5 stars, but I do round it up to 5, like on Goodreads. It was that good. It was just shy of a 5 star. I'm not sure why. Thinking on it now, I lean a little bit more towards 5 star now that I've had some time to think on it. But yeah, I do love that book, and that's The Savior's Champion by Jenna Morisi. And I will most definitely be continuing with the series. The Savior's Sister, I think, is next in line, and that's told from the Savior's perspective. The first one was the champion's perspective, and I am very excited to read that one. Fire Pit, the live shows. So join the author chat live or the after party live that same evening on Melanie's channel, and it was so much fun. It was great chatting with Jenna Marie. She has so much personality and is just so lovable and just super fun. And if you missed it, I will leave the link in the description box below in case you want to check it out, because it was just great. And she has her dog with her in her lap, and her dog is adorable. Garden. Read a book with flowers on the cover, and for that I did read Scales and Sensibilities, and this is by Stephanie Burgess, and this was so cute. It's the Regency Dragon series, the first book in the series, and this is Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen retelling. I think I own the second book as well, so I will definitely continue the series. I think it's about there's 3 sisters, so I think each book is from, the main character is one of the different sisters. Next we have Archery, a Weapon on the Cover, and for this I read Wrath by John Gwynne, the 4th book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. The Canteen, small book or graphic novel, and I read Saga Volume 10 by Brian K. Vaughan. The Lake, body of water in the title, and I read The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. And then Beach Volleyball, a book set outdoors. I ended up reading A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers, the 2nd book in the Monk and Robot series, and I love that series. It is so cozy. So cozy. But it is for adults. There's some language and stuff in there, so just keep that in mind. Woodshop, a building on the cover. And I read There's Something About Mira, so you can see some buildings in there, little city skyline. There's Something About Mira by Sonali Dev, and this book made me tear up a couple of times. It was so good. Basketball Court. Book has a sport, and I read Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh, the 1st book in the Boys of Toman series, and there is rugby throughout the book. One of the main characters is rugby player, and so you spend a lot of time with the rugby team and learning about rugby as well. Dance Studio, Mood Read. And for that, I read a few books. Vampire Academy, the 1st book in the series by Rochelle Mead. I read Legendary by Stephanie Garber, the 2nd book in the Carval series. Frostbite, the 2nd book in the Vampire Academy series by Rochelle Mead. Insanity, the 1st book in the series by Cameron Chase. And I read Keeping 13 by Chloe Walsh, the 2nd book in the Boys of Toman series, because the 1st one ended at a point where the triggers in the book had my anxiety so high, I had to find out what was going to happen to this character to make sure that they were going to be okay. And so I had to read the 2nd book. And then I put myself into a little bit of a reading slump with romances anyway, contemporary romances. I was okay with fantasy, and I think that's kind of where Shadow and Soul came in, one of my lowest rated, and why I liked it so much, because I was so burnt out with the whole contemporary romance, just the feel and everything about that one. And it was more, and not a rom-com, but a dramatic, more drama romance. And I just needed something comforting and cozy and get me out of the trigger spot. And yes, it definitely delivered for that. So I think that's one reason, and one of the reasons I loved it so much. But yeah, Keeping 13, they're both good, but I probably will not continue with the series, the Boys of Toman series. Climbing Wall, an intimidating read. And for that, I read a couple of books. One of them was The Dragon Bone Chair by Tad Williams, the 1st book in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series. I also read Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang by Kylie Lee Baker. Loved it. And then Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This one kind of goes into the same kind of category as 1984, and there's a couple others in there that are kind of that before its time books that I think you get a lot more out of it now, where it was really kind of sci-fi and kind of out there way back when, but now it seems a little more pertinent. And then another garden book with flowers on the cover, and that was Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. And this one was a middle grade, and it was just heartwarming and cute and fun, and loved it. Let's see. And then other ones that I don't remember what category I put them into, but probably intimidating for this one. So Climbing Wall, and that was Nosferatu by Joe Hill. It was a good book. It was very interesting. Not quite my cup of tea. Liked it, but I didn't love it. But it was more not my type of book. Not that the book was bad. I'm sure most people loved this book. Just there's certain aspects of it that weren't for me. And so it was more of a 4-star, 3.5, 4-star for me. But I think most people would probably give it a 4, 4.5. And then, let's see, I also read The Dose Effect by TJ Power. Loved that one. Clowns vs. Spiders. I think most of these are probably for intimidating read or the dance studio mood read. And that was really fun. That one was definitely cheesy 80s slasher movie kind of vibes. And then Culinary Leverage, one of my favorite books of May. And that was by Douglas Keane. Oh my gosh, loved it. Nonfiction biography. So good. If you're part of the cooking world at all, pick it up. Definitely recommend. 5 stars. That one also had me tearing up a few times. And then lastly, I've got 2 more for May. No, June. We're in June. 2 more for June. Yeah? Yeah. 2 more. Library of Dragons with Ash from Books to Ashes. And this was side quest 3. You're looking for companions, so you can have a romantic companion or you can just have an ally. Or you could get both. So you could read books in order to do both. And you need to have at least 4 books for each, or a maximum of 4 books. Maximum of 8 points and 2 companions. You can double up on books. And for this one, I ended up with an ally of a professor / teacher, librarian, etc. And for those prompts, I read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley for reading a school or library book, because I do know a lot of people have to read that book in school. I did not, but some people do. And then I also read Been on Your Shelf or your TBR for a long time, and that was Insanity by Cameron Chase. And then a POV from a villain or evil character, also, because you can double up, Insanity by Cameron Chase. I also read quite a few other books. I pretty much read something for every prompt but one on that one. And you had like a little board that you could fill out. So this is just the one that I didn't read on that. And then for the romantic companion, I did end up finding my romantic companion in Your Bodyguard or some type of royalty. And the books I read for that were a book that had a bodyguard or royalty in it, and that was Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. And then Yellow on the Cover, and for that I read A Court of Mist and Fury because the letters of the title are in yellow. And then a millionaire / romantasy, I read Legendary by Stephanie Garber. And then we move into the last one for June, and that was TBR Trails, and that is by Kimberly and her mother Julie, and I will leave their channels linked down below for you. And I'm on Team Azrae. We are the fairies, and we are going up against Team Centaur. The host and her mom is A-Star Reads. And for this one, we had a hard prompt, and it ended up being a free pick, which is good. And I read A Wonderful Christmas Crime by Jacqueline Frost, the 6th book in the Christmas Tree Farm mysteries. And then we had an extremely hard prompt, and that was to read a book over 700 pages. And for that, I read Wrath by John Gwynne, the last book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. And then we had to play Higher or Lower, and I had The Cabin at the End of the World for the book I didn't want to read, and then Scales and Sensibility by Stephanie Burgess is the book I really wanted to read. And yeah, I lost, so I read The Cabin at the End of the Woods by Paul Tremblay. And then random page number, we got a book 500 to 599 pages, and for that I read The Savior's Champion by Jenna Morisi, the first book in the Savior series. And then a random shelf. I had 5 different shelves. So I had my Camp SeasonAthon TBR shelf, I had my TBR cart shelf, my TBRopoly books, my book club books, and my Kindle backlist books. Oh, I forgot. There's one more readathon. I also took part in Back-To-Kindle readathon. We'll get to that one in a minute. So yeah, those were my shelves, and I ended up with my Camp SeasonAthon prompts, which was great. So then I randomized that, and I ended up with The Dragonbone Chair by Tad Williams. Not only did we have prompts for a book over 700 pages, a book between 500 and 600 pages, I also had to add a over 900 page book to my list. I read a lot of pages in June. Thank you so much for audiobooks and chores. And then we had an author first or last name, or the book title begins with a K. That one, I had nothing on my TBR. But then I remembered, oh yes, Saga, Volume 10 by Brian K. Vaughan. It is his middle name initial, but I took it because that's all I had. So Brian K. Vaughan, Saga Volume 10. And then lastly was the challenge, and we had to do a rainbow book stack and take a picture, and so that's a non-reading prompt. It's kind of an activity prompt. So here is my rainbow book stack. Now back to the Back-To-Kindle readathon, and this is with Reading with Rylan and Readers C, and this one was super cute. They also had kind of a camping theme, and there's 4 weeks in June, and each week you had a different prompt that you needed to complete with whatever your backlist was, and then you could also read a bunch of Kindle books, however many you wanted. So the first one is A Cozy Home. So read a comforting or nostalgic read. And I do love me some Jane Austen, so that is comforting. And one I had on my Kindle, and that is Scales and Sensibility by Stephanie Burgess. And then for week 2 It was The Stormy Mountains, and that is to read an intense, emotional, high-stakes read. And again, these all had to be digital books, so not necessarily something you were listening to or reading physically. So like I couldn't count this one for anything. For this one, it was more of a, there is some high stakes in there, but it's mainly kind of an emotional book, and that was There's Something About Mira by Sonali Dev. And then week 3, we had The Wondrous Caves. Read a book that sparks your creativity or imagination. And for this one, I read Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, the first book in the series. And then lastly, we had The Wild Woods. Read a book out of your norm or out of your comfort zone. And while I do read some nonfiction and I do read some biographies, I don't read a whole lot of either of those. And I do tend to get them more on audiobook than digitally. But this one I did get from NetGalley. And for that I read Culinary Leverage by Douglas Keane and loved it, loved it, loved it. Then also on my Kindle, I did read Vampire Academy because I borrowed that one from the library digitally. And then I also read Binding 13, which I had as an Amazon or one of my Prime Library borrows for the month. And then another one I read, but not for a specific prompt, but was on my Kindle. And of course, the books didn't have to be on your Kindle. They just had to be ebooks of some kind. And that was Insanity by Cameron Jace, the first book in the series. And this one happens to be a mashup of every book in the Insanity series. There's nine, one of the two, don't remember which, books in the series, and I've read the first one so far. But they're pretty short, under 300 pages, and they're very fun, a little trippy, but fun. And that is everything I read for May and June readathons. And stay tuned, I will be having a Q2 rapid fire wrap up of all the books I read in the second quarter of 2025. So April, May, and June. There's a lot of books in there. So it's not 8 hours long. I will just do a rapid fire list of everything I read and some quick stats. So thank you so much for joining me today as I did a quick run through of everything I read for the readathons in May and June. And I look forward to seeing you again in future videos. So stay tuned. And if you made it this far in the video, leave some type of ghosty emoji in the comments to let me know that you are here. And until next time, keep reading. Bye.